Evening, everybody. Thank you for coming and joining. I hope everybody will get something out of tonight's presentation. Tonight we have Dr. Vance Holliday. Dr. Holliday received a Bachelor BA in Anthropology from the University of Texas at Austin, an MA in Museum Science at Texas Tech University, and a PhD in Geological Sciences at the University of Colorado, Boulder. He was on the geography faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is now in both anthropology and geosciences at the University of Arizona. His research career began on the Great Plains of the U.S., focused on reconstructing and interpreting the landscapes and environments in which the earliest occupants of North America lived, and how those conditions evolved during the Paleo-Indian period. Since arriving at the University of Arizona, he became director of the Argonaut Archaeological Research Fund, which is devoted to research on the archaeology and geoarchaeology of the Paleo-Indian period in the southwestern U.S. and northwestern Mexico. In addition, he has been part of the international project focused on the Upper Paleolithic archaeology and the Paleo environments of the southwestern Russia and central Ukraine. That's a mouthful in today's world.
The other one is yours.
Would everybody please, yes, thank you. Would everybody please give a warm welcome to Dr. Vance Holliday? It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation and the chance to talk about some of our work. I was contacted to talk about the discovery that was announced, that was first published last fall on some very old human footprints in southern New Mexico. So I'll do that, but what I'm going to do first in the presentation is provide a little, to a certain extent, historical context and some archaeological context having to do with Paleo-Indian archaeology in general. I suspect most of you know something about what I'm going to talk about, but just to make sure that everybody has the same basic context, I'll start with some background to Paleo-Indian archaeology. Okay, so off we go. All right. Oops. So this term Paleo-Indians is, it's not terribly well defined. Another way I think about it is essentially the first Americans. And stereotypically, Paleo-Indian archaeology deals a lot with artifact styles and, in quotes, cultures. We know so little about their culture when you get right down to it. Most of what we know is from stone tools, because that's what preserves best. And stereotypically, they're characterized by very high quality raw materials, artifacts like the ones you see illustrated here, made of very high quality raw materials and exceptional workmanship. And so there on the lower left, you see Clovis artifacts, so-called Clovis artifacts. And then I also have an illustration of a kind of a typical Paleo-Indian sequence in this particular example from the eastern United States. Again, a very gross generalization here, and this focuses mostly on the Great Plains, this particular slide, because that's where we have the longest record of Paleo-Indian occupation, well documented, and a long record of research, as I was talking with some of you a while ago. This is where I got my start. So essentially, Clovis is the oldest well-known continent-wide archaeological tradition, about 13,000 years old, or maybe a little older, depending on who you ask, a little bit younger. Found almost all states, in the lower 48 anyway. And then through time, you start seeing some regionalization. The best known post-Folsom group, the best known post-Clovis group is Folsom, and they're classically known as hunters of bison on the Great Plains. And then there are a broad array of later Paleo-Indian artifact traditions on the Great Plains. You seem to see more regionalization of artifact styles as you go through time. So, as I said, Clovis is continent-wide. Folsom's more restricted to the central North America, and then these other beautiful artifact styles, unfluted artifact styles, the late Paleoindian, are become more varied across space. And then we also, I know more about the West, so I'll mention the West. In the Western U.S., we have this style called Western stemmed. It's not quite as stylistic, for lack of a better term, as Clovis and Folsom and the others, but it's quite long living at a minimum of 13,000 years and older, up to about 7,000 years. And there's some evidence that the Western stem is older in some cases. So anyway, the main point here is that the oldest well-known, well-documented, widely spread tradition, artifact tradition in North America is called Clovis. A map showing some of the better known Clovis sites. In yellow here is the type Clovis site. I call it the Clovis site. Others call it the Blackwater Jaw site. We were just talking about that a while ago. They're the same site. But you see Clovis is spread all over North America. We've been working on a site, that's a whole nother lecture, in northern Sonora, really interesting Clovis site. This is from the type Clovis locality. This photo, the upper right, was taken in the 1930s when the first work was going on there. On the left are the two of the type Clovis artifacts. I should have a scale in there. The one on the left's about 6 inches long. Well executed lancelet points. One of the most notable characteristics is the flute or channel flake that you'll see usually on both sides of the artifact, probably for hafting. And then a map of the first Clovis Mammoth Association that was well documented. And this was at the Clovis site in 1936. I should add, there were a couple of other sites with Clovis and Mammoth found, but they were found by themselves. In other words, there were no other layers at the site. What happened at the Clovis site is Folsom was found stratigraphically above Clovis and documented that they were two different things. At first, people didn't know if maybe these, what we call Clovis points, were just a variant of Folsom. They're not, they're predecessors to Folsom. Clovis type site, the Mammoth bone with a Clovis point embedded. And here you see a vertebra from a mammoth. I'll give you a second to see if you could spot the Clovis point in this photograph at the left. Look down in the lower left, and you'll see the base of the Clovis point in the, these are stream deposits at this particular part of the site, about 13,000 years old. Now, quite a few near where I live, well, they're more than three, in the San Pedro Valley of southeastern Arizona, southwest or southeast of Tucson. Whole series of sites, they're very well known to us. This is the first Mammoth Clovis site excavated off of the Great Plains. Emil Houry, my building where my office is named after Professor Houry, dug this in 1951. It's a single mammoth with and also the jaw mandible was preserved. This block, if you're ever in Tucson, you can see this block of mammoth ribs and other long bones at the Arizona State Museum. There were 9 Clovis points in amongst that pile of bone, and you can see all that on display. So that's way down here, right on the border in the very lower right of the image here at Naco. This is the Naco site. There are actually 3 sites down there. There are others in the area along the San Pedro, between, well, near Sierra Vista. Here's one of the ones at Naco. You can see the Clovis points in with the ribs. One end of a visual, there's been an argument that this was a mammoth that got away, that had points in it, but got away because no butchering tools were found, or flakes or anything you might expect in a kill site. That's still being debated. Another one, probably the best known of the group, is Murray Springs. My predecessor, Vance excavated this one. There was, in this particular part of the site, there was a mammoth bone bed. Well, they're excavating it right here. They got most of it out. You can see some excavations there. Those little depressions may well be mammoth tracks. come back to tracks in a few minutes. Murray Springs was a remarkable site. There was a mammoth kill with one individual. There was also a bison kill with 14 individuals, Clovis bison kill, and there was a Clovis camp. Here in the photograph is the excavations of the one mammoth. Quite a remarkable site. These are artifacts from the camp. Here on the left, you see two broken points, and then you also see the tips that snapped off. The tips were found in the camp. No, the tips were found in the camp, probably with meat, and the bases were found in the kill. So they know that the camp was directly related to the bison kill. Quite a remarkable find. So we know there were people in the Americas, well, at 13,000 or so, Western stemmed in the West, Clovis. But then the big debate has been for many years has been, were there people in the Americas before Clovis? I'm sure most of you have heard something about that. I won't go into the debate other than to say it was, and it still remains a pretty heated debate. Just this map shows just a handful of some of the better known sites. Cooper's Ferry in the northwest, and Paisley Cave nearby in Oregon, Heber Schaefer in Wisconsin, Meadowcroft in Pennsylvania, Page Ladstone in Florida, the Friedkin Galt Complex in Texas. I'm going to talk about our locality at White Sands, New Mexico, south central New Mexico, where there are no Clovis points. I didn't have a good icon for this map. So here we are in the southwest. The area I'm talking about is down here in the White Sands area. Just as a footnote, the Clovis site is over here, right almost on the state line in eastern New Mexico, and the Folsom type site is in northwestern New Mexico, about where the N is in M. So we're going to go down here. On this map, I'm illustrating a series of ancient lakes, Paleo Lakes, that existed right at the close of the last ice age. In the area where we've been working is Paleo Lake Ortero, and that plays a big role in the story I'm going to tell you. But there were some other ones, and there were quite a few in the Great Basin, quite a few Paleo Lakes. So this is from Google Earth. White Sands really pops out in the area. This big pile of gypsum is what it is. It's in the Tularosa Basin, just east of the Rio Grande, northeast of Clovis or Las Cruces, New Mexico. Some of you have probably been to White Sands. If you have, you're probably on US 70, which goes from Las Cruces to Alamogordo. The park itself is essentially the lower half of the gypsum sand dunes. What happened is during the last ice age, or just after, there was a huge Paleo Lake here, Paleo Lake Ortero. And then as the climate changed and dried, the lake dried up, and wind eroded the lake deposits, the gypsum lake deposits, and piled that gypsum up to form the largest gypsum sand dune field in the world. And so the national park, White Sands National Park, has the southern half of that, and the White Sands Missile Range has the rest. And our site is in the park, right on the edge between where the erosion was. This area is called Alkali Flat. That's what they call it today. It's scoured by wind. And the site is right on the edge of that area of scour, but just upwind from the dunes. I'll show you more. Now, I've been doing a lot of work out there for the last 10 years because it's the Tularosa Basin in the area to the north is just loaded with Paleo Indian sites. And I've had a very good working relationship with the park, but also White Sands Missile Range, which has a huge land holding. And there's a lot of Paleo Indian material, but virtually all of it is on the surface. These are on the right here, Folsom Points. This beautiful tiger striped chert is called Rancheria chert, makes these gorgeous artifacts. You can see a scraper in the upper left, and then broken Folsom below that. So there's a lot of Paleo Indian material, particularly Folsom, lots and lots of Folsom. So we've spent a lot of time working out there trying to understand how people were using the landscape and how that may have related to the ancient lake, Paleo Lake Ortero. This is another site, Lone Butte, I'm just illustrating that. It was very, very heavily collected. The park is to the north, and the Missile Range is top of the screen, and the Missile Range is off to the left. This is BLM land, and heavily collected. And a lot of the artifact collections made their way to the Smithsonian. And just as an illustration there of all Folsom material, the Smithsonian has 6,000 artifacts, Folsom artifacts off of this site. And the first time I ever went to the site, I didn't even know, I couldn't find it because there were no artifacts. It had been so thoroughly collected. I went back and we did finally find a few remnants of Folsom artifacts. But that gives you an idea how heavily impacted these sites are if they're not on the military land, the Missile Range, or on the national park, sadly. In any case, again, the point is their surface. Now, also in the area where all that wind erosion deflated the ancient lake, since I've been working in the area for the last 2 years, a lot of tracks of Ice Age mammals have popped up. On the right, my student there is looking at the tracks of Mammoth. You can see the imprints where the mammoth walked across the lake basin. This one, they think, is about 30,000 years old, eroded or exposed by the wind. The one on the right, it's heavily eroded in this photograph, but those are giant ground sloth, tracks of giant ground sloth. That photo was taken pretty close to near the site I'm going to talk about. I was there the first time in 2012 looking at these megafauna tracks. The problem has been, and then also the park people have been turning up the tracks of humans also at the surface. The problem is, we know that the megafauna was gone at least 13,000 years ago, so we know at least a minimum how old they are. Any of you listening to me could walk around out on that alkali flat after a rain and leave tracks. The problem with the tracks is dating them, figuring out how old they are. And there were indicators coming up. I think it's my next slide. Yeah. We began to realize that some of the tracks are in fact Ice Age, but only by association. This is showing you a mammoth track. Well, what happened was a human came across here. A mammoth then came across and deformed the human tracks. You can see how they're squeezed by the weight of that mammoth track. So we knew that those are associated, but they're at least Clovis age, because we know they're Clovis and humans were around. But we couldn't, because they're just on the surface exposed by the wind, there's no way to date them other than minimum age. And so the minimum age would be 13,000. And then you see the photo of the tracks on the right. So what happened was, why this site is so important, and what I'm going to talk to you about is because we found tracks in place in a stratigraphic context that could be dated. So again, here we are. The dunes are essentially to the east, right half of the white area, and then the wind erosion is in this area on the right. And so the winds come out of the west, erode to the east, and pile up the sand. And the area where we've been working is where wind erosion has been deflating some deposits that have the tracks. This is a Google image. One thing, you can see the main belt of dunes. Over here on the right, about center left is where the site is. But one thing I want to mention is Lost Draw. I intended to show it to you on the other satellite image, but there are a whole series of streams that come off the mountains. The mountains are to the east, and the streams flow west onto the basin floor. So keep that in mind, because I'm going to come back and mention Lost Draw. They call it Lost Draw because it disappears under the dunes. Okay, this is the site area. It's to me, I love this landscape, but I spent a lot of years on the high plains. But one thing I want to draw your attention to is the fence. Starting from the left, you can see the fences on the skyline, but it drops down toward the trucks. And where the trucks are, it's below the skyline. That's because where the trucks are and where I'm standing is the eroded floor of the old lake bed. So the wind blows from right to left, steadily erodes against this eastern escarpment. This is a very low escarpment that's created by the wind erosion. And then all the gyp dune sand, all the gyp that was in the lake is piled up downwind. You can just barely make out part of the dune field way off in the distance there. So this is where the tracks are exposed. So this is where the original find spot was, on the eroded floor here, but in these layered deposits you can see back here. So they realized they had tracks out here on a flat surface, and realized that those tracks went into this escarpment. The tracks, you could trace the tracks into some of the layers of sand, and bingo, we've got a site where the tracks are buried. And so the question was to expose more tracks and see if there was a way of dating them. So we're looking at stream deposits here, not lake deposits. The lake deposits would have been behind me to the west once upon a time in the past. So this is what they knew initially then, this little schematic I whipped up. There's old lake beds, they're more than 24,000 years old. And then there's layers of sand, old river deposits, stream deposits, and they had tracks on one of those layers, as I've illustrated here. Here are some of the tracks. This is just last January. They were in the field for more work last January, and I watched them excavate these tracks. So the original finds were out here on the flats, and they're trying to trace them into these layered deposits back here. Also in this trench, you can see the layering. So they're trying to follow individual layers of sand and follow the tracks, see if they can trace the tracks into this these geologic deposits. The photo on the right is a well-known photo. It was taken during the initial discovery of the site. That was in early 2020. Everything got shut down, of course, due to COVID, and that's why it took a while to get this published. Then on the left, you can actually see two levels with tracks. In the upper right of this leftmost photo, you see tracks going from human tracks. Somebody was walking from right to left, but you can also see those are under another layer of sand, and then those deposits have tracks. And then down deep, as they started cutting this trench, they ran into more tracks. Here, these don't show up very well, but they are in fact human tracks. So a lot of things started happening because they found these multiple layers of tracks, and then they also realized that in digging this trench, mainly just to understand the geology, they were finding more tracks in the trench. So then they realized, well, there are at least several layers of tracks, and that they are in fact buried. So the question then is, how old are they? Can we date the layers to come up with age estimates for the tracks? Whoops, excuse me. This is the trench, big trench they cut. And as they were excavating the trench, they kept coming up with more tracks. This is one here. It's not the best, but it is a track. This photo is illustrated in the paper that was published. And it's very clearly in this stratigraphic or stratified context you see here. And then again, the layers of sand you can see here. And what they've been doing now, they were in the field, we were all out there in January, and then I think there's another team out right now. They're extending the track, they're extending the trench, because the farther they go east, they can get into thicker layered deposits looking for more tracks. And they've been finding them. We found them, a bunch of them coming up in January. So multiple layers of tracks in the old stream deposits. So figuring out how old they are. This is Jeff Pagotti's a geologist with the U.S. Geological survey, and he's a specialist in radiocarbon dating or C14 dating. And what they discovered were little seeds buried in these sands. Now, these are the older lake beds. By coincidence, I had worked on a trench about 150 meters from here on the missile range. We're in the park where this photo was taken, where the site is, but just to the north. And these old dark gray lake beds we knew were at least 24,000 years old. So that got everybody's attention. So they collected seeds from multiple layers that are sandwiched in with the track. Seeds of a little aquatic plant, rupia. It's known as ditch grass. And got some dates. So this photograph, that's a composite photograph of that trench as of 2020. And you can kind of see where they were sampling these little columns.
Can I call you
So
back?
down at the bottom here
Hello?
is the result of the dating. Oops. And you can see how old the dates are. Oops, hang on, the chat room just, okay. 22, almost 23,000 in the oldest dates, but not the oldest tracks. There are more tracks below that. And the dates come up to about 21,000 years. So as of this publication, as of a year ago, the tracks seem to be in the time range of about 23,000 roughly to 21,000 years ago. So 23,000, that's 10,000 years older than Clovis. So quite remarkable turn of events. And there are tracks younger. And as of January, we found several trackways above the 21,000 year level. And there are several track levels below the 22,500 or 23,000 year level. So, and lots of megafauna, the giant Pleistocene animals. I didn't mention the tracks we've identified in the park. It's mammoth, you saw the photos, giant ground sloth, you saw those. We have camel, there was an now extinct form of camel, a dire wolf, of all things out there. I think there's bison, and they just found some bear tracks as well. And they're all they're all intermixed. You have human tracks going over mammoth and bear tracks going over human tracks, back and forth all over the place. So the question then is, why was it such a popular place? Why are people and animals coming back over and over? And this goes back to lost draw. Well, these sands are not lake deposits, they're stream deposits. The Paleo Lake Ortero was just to the west, and most of the deposits there, as I mentioned, are gypsum. The site, locality 2, you see in the little box there, those are not gypsum lake beds, they're stream deposits. We're on a floodplain, and quite possibly we're out on a delta where the ancient draw flowed into the Paleo Lake. And then now the dune field covers lost draw. And there's several indicators that it's a delta. From one thing, the area of sands, it's about 500 meters north-south. It's really wide, and it's much wider than lost draw is. So we think we're getting to a point where the water was spreading out as it flowed into the dune. So that would be a very obvious draw because it's fresh water coming out of the mountains. You have gypsum loaded water out in Paleo Lake Ortero. We know that because there's so much gypsum deposited. So a source of fresh water would almost certainly attract a lot of people. Well, would attract people, however many were in the area, as well as attract animals, big and small. This is a nice composite diagram they put together. This is as of last fall. You can see there are at least 8 trackways as of last fall, track horizon, TH, and you see the range of dates. They've sampled above and below that. And I should add, They've got other materials to date. They discovered that there's a lot of pollen mixed in as well. And so that way we can date something different and see if we get the same dates. There's been some pushback on the dating because these plants, the rupia, will take up groundwater. And the concern has been that the groundwater would be from the lake and might have old carbon. And the argument is that the site is actually younger, and that the reason we have these old dates is because of there's old carbon in the water. But another important aspect of this freshwater hypothesis, we're in a stream system, is that these seeds were growing in fresh water. They would have water coming out of the mountains that should be in equilibrium with the atmosphere. In other words, they have the same carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio that you and I have as living things. So we're pretty sure the dating is correct, but we now can check that with pollen. And so that work is literally underway. You can also see here how they've, it's kind of an interesting little diagram once you figure it out, how many tracks there are, numbers of human tracks in each track horizon, 11 tracks here, 37 tracks here. How many people were involved? One in some cases, in other cases, based on the size and shape of the footprint, you can identify multiple people. You can also get an idea of whether they were adults or kids or teenagers. And in a few cases with the animals, like as of last year, there were several layers that included mammoth, and this one included the direwolf. As I said, we now know that there are more animals out there, and there are more trackways above and below what we first identified. So then the question is, when exactly did people get into the Americas? We thought, as I said, for a long time that Clovis was the first. And then some of those other sites that I showed you in that map that might be older than Clovis, even if they are, and that's important, but even if they are, this is when the ice sheets, the big glaciers that once covered North America were already retreating. The really striking thing about the dating at White Sands, 21,000, 23,000 years ago, was at the height of the last ice age. There was solid glacial ice from coast to coast. So how did people get here and when? And so one of the strongest arguments is that they must have been here sooner. There must have been people living in North America earlier, when people could get into the Americas, either coming along the coast before it was covered with glacial ice, or coming down across the so-called Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, and then on down into the Americas before the ice sheets covered the continent. Most of you probably know this, but let me, as a reminder, there was one big ice sheet covering about 2/3 of Canada, 3/4 of Canada, and then there was a smaller one in the mountains. And so the big one was sort of based around Hudson's Bay, and it would grow and grow and go, and it would meet one growing in the mountains, and they would grow and grow and go to the point where they coalesced, covered all of Canada. So before that happened, people could have come in down through the Great Plains or along the coast. But at the ice maximum, as you see illustrated here, it was, well, I won't say impossible, but it's not as likely that people came over the ice. They probably tried, and it's possible people made it, or they'd have to boat along the ice front in the North Pacific. So it's not an illogical conclusion to think that people had to have come down from Asia sooner than, or earlier than 23,000 years. And that would have to be before the ice was at its maximum. And so that would take you back probably 25, 26,000 years. But by the time of the occupation at White Sands, it was solid ice from coast to coast across Canada. And coming back to the issue of older than Clovis sites, there are a number that are proposed, but again, those are all going to be as they would represent the time during which the ice was beginning to retreat from the coast and retreat from the Great Plains. So it's likely that these sites, those people could have gotten into the continent later, but clearly the people down at White Sands had to have come earlier, much earlier than the site is dating, earlier than 23,000. So that's our story. Thank you. And let's see. I'm getting a message as my internet connection is unstable, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. Would you like me to stop sharing or? Well, I'll stop sharing.
Yes.
I'll get out of this so I can see people. And if we need to go back to a map, that's easy enough to do.
And we'll open it up for questions.
I'll start question. That's pretty far inland if they came down the coast. What was it that all of a sudden they stopped and then went inland and went to the White Sands area?
No idea. I mean, the problem, of course, is there's no other site as this old. That's this old, well-documented site, this old. So we just don't know. I mean, of course, you could say the same thing about a lot of those other early sites. Is, you know, like, what the heck are people doing in Wisconsin 14,000 years ago? There are a couple of sites in Wisconsin that are pretty good indicators that people were there with Mammoth about 14,000 years ago. I don't know. I mean, they're unknowables. All we can say right now is one thing I should mention as a footnote in the debate. Most of you probably know this. For most of the sites that are proposed as early sites, there's arguments about, you know, is that broken rock? Was it broken by humans? Argument. These broken bones, were they broken by humans? Argument. We don't have that problem. We got people. There's no doubt, because you saw the tracks. They're phenomenal. The question we have is the dating. I mean, the question that the pushback we've been getting is on the dating, and I'm pretty confident of that. That's all we know right now. We can't say another thing about where they came from. I mean, of course, it's generating all kinds of speculation, which is great, but we know so little. I don't know. Why do people go anywhere? Right now it's an unknowable, but there's no doubt they were there for a while, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Dr. Holliday, I'm wondering what you make of the sites in South America. Obviously, Monteverde's over 20,000, I believe, and there's been some other ones, I think, that are claiming that. What do you think of that in the context of North America?
Well, there's several sites. Yeah, they're not as old. Monteverde's like 14,500. There's several sites. There are a number of sites that have been proposed as older than Clovis. Several of them have pretty serious problems. Monteverde is, as far as I'm concerned, is solid, and it's 14,000. In my opinion, and all this is, you know, you ask 5 archaeologists, 10 archaeologists, what are the most reliable pre-Clovis sites, and you're going to get 10 completely different. You're going to get 10 different lists. I think Monteverde's solid. I think our site is solid. I think the White Sands locality is, right now, it's the oldest well-documented case for human presence in the Americas. But that's just one site, and there's so much more to learn. But yeah, there's several sites in South America that are good candidates, but I don't know of any that have a really good case for being as old. And I say that, I was saying that long before this site was discovered. So it's just, I was just very fortunate to be involved in this. I saw somebody had a hand up or a comment. Oh, here we go. Oh, there's a whole bunch of chats. I'm terrible on Zoom. Even in my classes, I always forget to look at people's chats. Somebody mentioned via the ocean. That's a possibility. There's no way to know. We don't have any kind of evidence for boating technology of that time period, but we know people had boats in some places in the world. They got from Southeast Asia to Australia during the last ice age. And people almost certainly later in time came down the coast. They had to have boats. We just don't have the technology. There's no evidence for open ocean, really a long distance open ocean seafaring technology from this time period. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. We just don't have the evidence for it. Let's see. How do you think your
Dr.
site is
Holliday,
relative?
that was my question. And
Oh, hi.
yeah, hi. I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to hear you finally. Full disclosure, I'm in CRM and mitigation paleontology. And this is just, congratulations on the find of a
thanks.
lifetime,
Oh yeah, your name was familiar when I saw it. Anyway, yeah, thank you very much. Glad you could attend. Somebody
But
asked.
related to that though is the Native Americans narrative of they've been here since the beginning of time. So I think that's important to mention to people too.
Yes, yeah, we've gotten them involved, a variety of groups. This is a national park, of course, so they've made great efforts to get groups in New Mexico involved. I've been out there when they've been out involved in the fieldwork, so it's really nice to see that. It's long overdue. Here's a question. How do you think your site is relative to the Gatlin site? I suspect you mean the Galt site that Mike Collins and others from Texas State. There was somebody apparently gave a presentation claiming they found older material. I don't think the oldest at Galt is as old. I think it's like 16,000. But I've been to the site way back a long time ago. And there's another one, there's a neighbor site like a couple hundred yards away, the Friedkin site, that's also old. They have a good story. There's some issues I have with some of the dating, but otherwise they're spectacular sites no matter how you slice it. But the dating, Friedkin I think goes in the 14s and Galt is in the 16s, I think. Let's see, what else?
I have a question. On the footprints, what's the consistency of the material around the footprint? Is it solidified or is it like a sandy? Will it wear down? Is it got to be protected eventually?
Good question. It varies, but you saw that escarpment, how gentle it is. It's eroding quite rapidly. There are tracks out there like Mammoth. Well, when I first went out there, one of the reasons I was invited out was to look at the megafauna tracks. And they have a lifespan of about 2 years from the time they're first exposed to the time they're blown away. So yeah, it's a real touchy issue, conservation issue, because this is a national park called White Sands. Why is it there? Why is that park there? Because wind erosion built the dunes. So this is a natural process that creates the park. So you can't shut that down without a lot of people making a lot of changes in the national park system. Because conservation is a critical issue, but not just archaeological conservation, then the environment. So you can't stop the erosion. But what they're trying to do, this is all stuff that I'm not involved in, is how to interpret the site, how to preserve some component of the site. One of the things they do is very high resolution mapping. And in theory, they could reproduce the tracks. I saw this in Australia at a really almost the same age site in Australia where they had a large area of human tracks about 20,000 years old, and they reproduced that at a museum. so people could see what this looked like and stand in the tracks. This is in a remote area of the park. That's another issue, is how do you make it accessible to the public? Well, that gets tricky because you where to put trails, because you either have to go over the dunes or you have to go through the missile range, and or the end Holloman Air Force Base. So you start getting into all kinds of issues. But preserving this stuff is a problem. Now, to go back to your question, some of the layers are relatively easy to weather, but as you can see in the photos, you also get some little ledges. So some of the layers are harder to weather. And some of that stuff, that trench was cut with a saw that's used on concrete. And what they do is they saw it down, and then they take a wedge and they pop it, and it'll crack on the bedding planes. And they tend to crack where the tracks are, because the tracks have compressed the sediment. And so they pop them open, and there you have a track and a mold of the track in the block in the ground. There's a lot to be written about this, about how you identify tracks, how you excavate tracks, how you preserve tracks. But this is a big issue, and it's going on right now. But preservation is a big problem. Conservation, preservation, interpretation, all of the above.
How were they first discovered? Did somebody looking for lithics or something?
No, they were looking for tracks, because they've been finding the megafauna are all over the place. They've been mapping those for 10 years, but the park people started finding these human tracks at the surface in amongst mammoth tracks. But as I said, you and I could go out there after the next rainstorm, and we could walk right over and leave human tracks right over a mammoth track. We wanted to do that. So the key was finding them in context. And so they've been spending a lot of time looking for tracks, and they were looking on the east side, because that's where we have those layered sediments. And there were mammoth and other tracks all over the place. I've been seeing them out there for years. And they finally, the first slide I showed where the people are working, they finally found human tracks on a layer they could trace into those other layers. But they were out specifically looking for human tracks that they could find in context, in a buried context, because that's been an issue for some years. Yeah, they're human tracks, and yes, some of them are associated with megafauna, but to date them, we've got to find them buried. And by golly, they did. There was one particular fellow at the Park Service that I've been working with for years. He's pushed this, David Bustos, he's pushed this and pushed this and pushed this, and it paid off big time. So we all owe a lot to him and the support he was getting at the park and in the Park Service in Washington, D.C. They really, we owe them a lot. Yeah. Yay for the Park Service, you bet.
Do any of the tracks have evidence of moccasins or sandals?
That's a really good question. We have a fellow from the U of A, as a matter of fact, here who specializes in ancient textiles. And they brought him in specifically to see if we can see that, if there's some evidence of that. All the tracks I have seen look exactly like the tracks you and I would leave on the beach, which suggests that they weren't wearing sandals. But I heard that there are a couple of tracks, some tracks have turned up that may have sandals, but that's all I know. There may be some people with sandals.
These
So
tracks they're so far out of the way though that they're not visible to the public. They're not open.
No, they're way out in a remote area, which is good right now. They're protected. They're way on the other side of the dunes. When you go into the park, you come in on the east side of the dunes, and then you can go in to about the middle of the dune field. But there are no other roads or tracks. There are no other roads in the park that'll take you out there. So that's something they're working on, is trying to figure out is there a way they could get people out, maybe in groups in all-terrain vehicles or something like that. But because people want to see them now, they're pretty cool. What else?
I had a couple questions. Have you thought about why the tracks themselves are not deflated as well?
They're on all the indications are they're on a floodplain that's been building up. So people walk around on the floodplain, there's a flood. More people walk along the floodplain, there's a flood. Just stacked up. Just,
Oh,
yeah.
man.
And that's how they were exposed, because that's easy to erode. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and then I'm
pretty
thinking
remote.
of the implications for the, depositional environment, and so forth, and in terms of modeling and trying to predict in this Southwest, in the West, and other parts of the country. I mean, the implications are huge. You're looking for a needle in a haystack, but you've got some idea, this very unique environment with this dune. So I don't know if you can speak about that at all.
Well, the wind erosion is, I've know the literature on the Paleo Lakes reasonably well. I haven't been to very many of them, but I've read a lot about them. White sands is by far the most heavily deflated, heavily eroded by any standard of all the lakes, the 100 or so Paleo Lakes. The next most eroded that I know of happens to be to the north of us in the Estancia Basin, which is east of Albuquerque. Similar setting, gypsum lake beds, and a lot of erosion. Not like white sands, but there's a lot of erosion. So that's an obvious next place to look. The downside, if you want to call it a downside, it's all private land. It's not in a national park. And so, but that's the next obvious place to look. And they're looking in other places at white sands. But that's this erosion that, well, you had to have the right sequence of events to preserve them. And now you've got erosion that's exposing them. So yeah, a whole series of taphonomic processes, as you would say in paleontology. Yeah. The megafauna tracks, though, are astonishing. The numbers of megafauna tracks and the varieties all over, it's amazing. But, even without the human tracks, it's a phenomenal record out there. It really is.
So, Vance.
Yeah. Hey, one of our former students, Dr. Jesse Ballinger.
Yeah. So
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Anyway, so
I'm losing you.
Pessimist. So sometimes I want to see what the human footprint looks like before it gets excavated.
Yep. That question has come up a lot. And they need the footprint. I should mention, there's a fellow from England who's one of the world's leading authorities on tracks, and he's the guy driving that part of the research. And I have impressed this upon him by saying most archaeologists in the world will never see a human footprint in their archaeological site. Never. They just don't preserve. And so, much less see one and map it, much less see a whole bunch of them and map them, much less excavate them. It's essentially, it's very, very rare. And so they need, the group involved in specifically in the tracks needs to do a much better job of explaining the whole process. And I watched them excavate in January. I watched them expose them and excavate them because I wanted to see it. And the thing that surprised me is how quickly you could excavate them. What's it?
Yeah, I would think that it would be intuitive, that is a footprint.
Yep. Yeah.
And then you excavate it, but it's the whole process. I'm sorry.
No, it's, I was surprised at how fast there's lots of different ways of making tracks and they're preserved in different ways. But what I was watching was the tracks were in relatively soft sand, like still soft. You could, it wasn't the concrete. And I wasn't seeing them at first. I just had to watch as they exposed them. But what they would do in this particular case, they just had some little bamboo, and they could work around the edges and just pop, the fill would pop out. So they're not troweling, because I think some people were wondering if they were accidentally making human tracks. Well, you don't accidentally make perfect size and shape of a consistent human track. That's impossible. The best or bioanthropologists in the world could never do that. And they were just, the sediment fill was just popping out. And so they were exposing, I showed you one of the first photos, there were 3 or 4. Those were exposed and cleaned out within a couple of hours. It's pretty fast. I was really impressed.
So what was
Well,
the
it's
fill?
like,
I mean, is that finer sands or something? I mean,
In that specific case,
features
But-
like hearths and, storage caches and stuff, not footprints.
just footprints. Well, think about it. How long does it take you, let's say, to walk across the room you're in? How long would it take you to leave footprints? 2 or 3 seconds? You're looking at just a
I think it would
microscopic.
take me like 1 second.
Yeah, you're looking at literally at a photograph of in time. So that's part of the story. And we haven't exposed that much. And also another thing to think about is, what's the likelihood that somebody's a forager 25,000 years ago, a hunter-gatherer, is going to drop a tool and leave it? I think it's going to be exceedingly rare, because they're investing so much time and effort in making whatever tools they're making, wooden tools, bone tools, stone tools. You don't just, so somewhere out there, we hope, still preserve our camping areas. They're probably under the dunes, but
Well,
more so
It's
very deep, because those dunes are less than 10,000 years old.
thing is that, like, if you could get a tool to go with the dates of the footprints, that'd be awesome.
Yep. There's so much to expose. I mean, what I showed you, the tracks are in an area about twice the size of the room I'm in, plus the trench. That's it. Sum total. So it's a tiny, tiny, tiny area. And there's years and years and years of work to do to just peel those layers away and keep exposing it. And then one of the things I'm trying to do, in fact, this summer, we're going to see if we can find the places that weren't on the floodplain, or maybe older lake beds that maybe form terraces or something like that. But a lot of that's under the dunes, and they don't just let you bring your D9 Caterpillar out there. Now, on the missile range, though, they do have a road goes through, so we're going to do some looking over there. Yeah, it's it's still back to a Newland haystack. It'll be easier to find human tracks than it'll be to find artifacts. That's for sure.
Amazing.
All,
Yeah,
all those tracks looks like they were walking. That doesn't look like they were running or standing still or dragging anything or sitting down or laying down. It was just walking footprints, right?
That's the impression. So you feel like you're in the middle of, A to B. Or somewhere between A and B. They're going from somewhere to somewhere. And think about it, out on a floodplain, that might make sense, because if they're camping somewhere else, they're crossing the floodplain, maybe to get to fresh water here or some plants over there. But yeah, you're right. You don't, right there, but again, it's a real small area. You don't see anything that looks like people congregating and doing things like you would see on a beach. You go down to the beach and people have their chairs and stuff, and it's all tramped. This is tracks going all different directions, but the tracks. Yeah, that's a good point. So sooner or later, we're going to find something.
It's probably too early too to think about individuals and who made those tracks as an individual person. Have you done any investigation about that, or your colleagues?
The tracks, yeah. In that one slide, they were given an indication like how old. There's a really cool track. This made some news a few years ago. It was not buried. It was at the surface, but you could see an adult and then a child. Track, and then the child track is gone. The adult keeps going, and then the child track reappears. Clearly, everybody has kids. an adult and a kid were walking along. The adult picked the kid up. They walked away. As the kid wanted to get back down, they put him back down. So you get some really cool stories like that. So yeah, these are the kind of things the track people are going to put together, is try to get some feel for the age structure, or at least some of the basic, biological mechanics, height,
Yeah, the
the
stature.
gait, all that stuff. Yeah, they're working on that. Yep.
Oh man, I'm so happy for you. This is like great part of your career, This is
It
amazing.
really is amazing. Yeah.
Never predicted this.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, who knew? Again, the park people were persistent, and it really paid off. I was happy with the megafauna.
One thing
What was
that
that?
amazes me is in that very small area, as you go down through the strata, you're finding tracks over thousands of years.
Yeah.
And all in that same area. So if you expand the area, what are you going to see?
Yeah, that's actually I'm glad you raised that point, because it's a really important issue. It would be enough to just find one good set of human tracks that old, and it seems like we've got several thousand years worth of people coming back over and over and over, and there's nothing like that anywhere for sure
The fact
in
that you
the
found us
Americas.
all in that one place rather than half a mile.
Exactly. It's not just a dead mammoth here that was killed or some old artifacts there. It's very obviously people coming back over and over. There's nothing like that. In fact, even the well-known sites like Blackwater Draw, even in the younger Paleo-Indian period, there are very few sites that have 2,000 years with 8 or 10 or 12 occupations. So it's unusual in so many different ways. In many ways, that's the thing that's hardest for me to kind of comprehend, is where are those people? Why aren't we seeing them anywhere else on the landscape if they're coming back over a period of thousands of years? And the sites, we don't have them. They must be out there somewhere, but we certainly don't see them. And people have been looking for decades. And
Do you think you hit the bottom of the strata where the footprints are, or they're
pretty close, because in one or two of those slides, you could see this real almost black stratum. That's an old lake clays. It's really hard to excavate. It's not layered. It's very unlikely we'll be able to find anything because it's not layered, but it seems to be right at that particular area. That's the local bedrock, for lack of a better term. So we can go wide, but we can't go much deeper than what you saw. A little bit in a few places. That dark gray clay dips a little bit, and we're here, and so there are a few places where we can go down slope a little bit, but not very much.
Okay.
That's what creates the flats. The wind can't erode into that dark gray stuff, and so it erodes wide rather than deep.
Were you able to see any detail in any of the footprints regarding toenails? Because they keep growing, and
Yeah. No, I haven't. That's a good question for the track people. I've never seen anything that looks like that. I'm just trying to think. So this is a good experiment for all these people we have here. Is the next time you're on the beach, look and see if you leave imprints of your toenails. Because this isn't soft beach sand, though. This is a little bit muddier sand on a floodplain. But I haven't seen anything like that.
well, we have tools to trim our toenails, but I don't know if they had tools. I don't know if they were trimming them or if they were just wearing by walking, or.
My guess is if they're barefoot all the time, the nails just break off or wear off, which makes you wince to think about it. That's a good point. Don't know. I haven't seen the nail imprints. What else?
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah.
Or-
There was another question on the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me take a look here. Why aren't the tracks? Oh.
What kind of food resources?
All the way back into the Pliocene. No, because this is 2020. The Pliocene is 2.5 million years back. So Well, I'm just surprised we could push it back 10,000 years. That alone. And Native Americans do say, yeah. Okay. Is there any indication of food resources? Oh, no, that's a good question. I've never seen any indicators of fish or anything. One thing I want, or even bivalves, I've been trying to find out is what can live around a lake that has so much gypsum in the water that it's precipitating gypsum. Can people live on that? It tastes terrible, but can you survive? Are there other kinds of animals that can survive? I think the place to look would be on the margins where there's going to be a lot of vegetation, and that would attract animals, big and small, rather than out in the lake. And one big problem we have, although the erosion has been helping us, so much of that lake margin is gone. It's just literally blown away by the wind. So we don't have any, like a lot of the Paleo Lakes, some of you might know this, leave shorelines. Well, we don't have obvious shorelines anywhere out there. So we don't have a place where we can stand and say, okay, right here, we're at the edge of the Paleo Lake, right here. You can't do that. It's either covered by the dunes or it's eroded.
Well, the megafauna also had to eat, so they had to be finding food there too.
Yeah, I think, again, I come back to that floodplain. I think that might have been a mecca, because you'd have all kinds of plants that are living on fresh water or living on the fresh water there. But there's got to have been other kinds of plants and small animals. But no, that's a good question. We've not seen any kind of fossils like that. I've seen a lot of the lake beds, but no fish fossils or bivalves. Now I don't know what we've never seen any bones. And I think the gypsum, that really strongly alkaline gypsum environment doesn't preserve bones. Amy probably could speak to that, but I've never seen a bone out there anywhere. And, you had to have animals living and dying out there. Just doesn't preserve, unfortunately. Just the big tracks.
Vance, like one of the cool things about trails is how long they last. And so like trails that even though you get all this wind blown stuff out there, that's covering the alluvium really preserves the tracks that they're talking about. These game trails, these things are old.
Yeah, that's another good point. Somebody else made a kind of a related question about predictive modeling. We know so little right now about the bigger picture out there. One of my projects is going to be to try to trace the paleo lost draw back through the dunes. We're trying to figure out some ways of doing that so we can constrain the stream beds, and then maybe there are sites along the margins of the old draw, the paleo draw, and with exposure of enough of the tracks. But we're talking years of excavating, because if you've got 10 tracks in a meter's worth of sediment, 10 track layers, and this huge expanse, that's a lot of sand to move, but they're going to do it. I mean, there's a variety of projects we're thinking about trying to get going. It's almost overwhelming trying to figure out what to do first. But yeah, these are all good questions. Reconstructing the environment, local environment, is one of my interests. Where's the stream? Where was the old lake? How far can we trace the stream? How continuous are the tracks? Things like that. Let's see, do I have any more? Food resources, yeah, we got them. Climate. Yeah, it was wetter. We know it was wetter because the lake was high, but that's a pretty, for the Southwest, all of those lakes were at their maximum a little bit later. But because we know where the stream is, and if we're on a delta, we can also say about where the water was. And so the lake was high. And most of those lakes in the Southwest, like Wilcox Platte, if you've ever been through southeastern Arizona, was high in the probably 21,000, 22,000 and younger into the high teens, like 18,000, 19,000 in there. Most of those lakes were up. So it was definitely cooler and wetter. But there's been very little paleoenvironmental work done in that area. In fact, in a completely separate project, we've got some cores from some small lakes where we're getting pollen and all, but they don't go back that far. I thought we had a nice long record, and it only went to like 14,000. I thought, man, we got it made now. And then, nope, we don't have what we need. But I think I mentioned we've got pollen in the beds with the seeds. And so the pollen is going to will tell us something about some of the vegetation in the area. So we're getting there. It's going to be a while. When is the next publication? I don't know. I don't know. Somebody has to start writing it. I haven't heard. I don't know what the plans are. I'm just one cog in the wheel. Screen size. It's all dry screen. There's no way to get water out there that I can think of other than bringing it out in water tanks. Screen size. I didn't look at the screens. I can't tell you. I can't tell you because I wasn't involved in that part of the excavation. Is that it? Okay.
Can you give an estimation on how tall these people were from the footprint size?
You know what? I'm going to go back to a slide. I was thinking, okay. Over here on the right, toward the right, you can see some height estimates for the people. So my eye height is, I think it's 180 millimeters. So that's 1.8. Yeah, I'm 6 feet tall, so I'm a little under 2 meters. So these people, these height estimates are all, well, that 1.9, that's how tall I am. So, but you'll see the range here. Most of them are somewhat smaller, like 6 to 10 inches, roughly. Say smaller than 6 feet, if that makes any sense. So stature, yeah. So yeah, they can tracks are. That's what's so interesting because there's so few human remains. Even Clovis, there's one Clovis skeleton, very few Folsom skeletons. There are very few. So that's yet another part of this that's completely different from what we usually see, is we can learn a lot about physically who these people were. We don't have genetics right now. There's no way of getting genetics out there, but maybe someday.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Gosh, thank you guys. Great questions. I really appreciate it.
I will be sending you this appreciation certificate in the mail.
Thank you.
And thank you again for making this presentation. I want to talk about next month. We're going to have Dr. Metin Aaron. He's from Kent State University. He's going to be on East Coast time, Zooming with us. And the title of his talk is, Did the Clovis Culture Cause the Extinction of Elephants in the Ice Age North Americas? So that's next month. And it'll be a Zoom meeting, and we're getting close to in-person meetings, but keep an eye on your emails and the website. And if you're a member of PCAS, you'll be notified as soon as we get back into in-person meetings. Am I forgetting anything? Anybody? Otherwise, I will say goodnight to everybody, and thank you again, Dr. Holliday.
Thank you.
Have a safe drive home.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good
Certainly was a
presentation.
great job by everyone.
Yeah, great
Good
questions.
night.